Hi there, my name is Sarah Hopkins. I am a social worker by training. Currently, I am a social work instructor at Winthrop University, and I do consultation work here at Hospice and Community Care. I am here to talk with you today about navigating children's grief during uncertain times. So, why this presentation? What we're looking at is over the next 6 weeks, this week included, so 5 weeks after this week, is we are looking at how to best support children through the rest of the summer and as we approach the upcoming school year. As I mentioned, I am a social worker by training. I was a hospice social worker for a little over a decade prior to joining academia and teaching social work students. I'm from upstate New York. I've been down here in South Carolina and Rock Hill for about the last 2 years, but I'm also a mom. I have a 7 and a 10-year-old. And I know for my family and myself, since we have all been at home and not in school since March 17th, our world has turned a little bit upside down. I know as we look at coming into August, there's a lot of questions my kids have that I can't necessarily answer. There's a lot of questions my students have at Winthrop that I can't really answer right now either. There's just a lot that is up in the air, which I think it's important to talk to our kids about while navigating our own grief as well. So the hope is over the next 6 weeks, this week included, to offer some education and validation about what you may be seeing with your own kids. So, just to start off with some basic definitions, and just as a reminder that a loss can be a person, place, or thing, and a person may experience grief from any of these things. Often, when we hear grief, we think it is just grief only happens because of the death of a loved one, or a major move, or a major loss. I want you to really think through the last 16 to 17 weeks of all of the losses that you, your kids, your family may have faced. You certainly, I know in my family, we have lost structure, we've lost routine. My kids have lost the structure and routine of being in a classroom. They've lost some of their socialization by not being in the classroom, being around their friends. They've certainly lost socialization through being at sports. There's moments as a parent where I feel like I have a loss of sanity. I don't know about any of you, but trying to work from home, I'm lucky that I am able to work from home, but trying to work from home and then homeschooling, and now with it summer, keeping my kids occupied and off of technology all of the time, it's been a lot to navigate. Some families have lost income. Other families have lost security and safety. So really think about all of the losses you as parents have faced and losses that your kiddos have faced over the last several weeks. So which brings us to, what is grief? How would you define grief if you had to? And grief is simply all of the feelings we have when we experience a loss. It's a normal reaction to loss and change. What happens far too often, though, in my experience, both working with bereavement, teaching, and just in my own personal life, is when people experience loss, they want to go through the grief as quickly as possible and then kind of shut the lid on that box of grief and keep moving forward. As a society, we tend not to do the best job with grief. For example, when a person experiences the loss of a loved one, if that loss of the loved one is defined as a close enough loss, they may get 3 bereavement days off of work. And then they're expected, in most cases, to go back to work. We're grieving all of the time. We don't always acknowledge it as such. Our kids are grieving a lot of the time too. What we tend to do with kids' grief, though, and kids' loss, is we tend to wrap it up and put a bow on it and call it a celebration, which there are things to celebrate. For example, kindergarten, graduation, 5th grade move up, actual high school graduation. Those are all things to be happy about and celebrate, but those are all things that we should look at as loss for our kids too, and allow children the space and the words to talk about, feelings of grief that they may have. I know from, my kiddos as this year, as we drove up to school to drop off our end of the year packets and pick up kids' belongings, I looked in the rearview mirror as we were driving away, and my 7-year-old son has tears in his eyes. And I said, "Buddy, what's going on?" And he said, "I'm just really going to miss my teacher, and I'm really going to miss, my friends in class this year." Which I understood the friends in class, but the teacher, I was shocked to hear, because him and the teacher did not have the best relationship. But for him, he said, "When I go back to school, it's not going to be the same. I'm not going to go back to the same classroom." So again, we celebrate a lot, but we don't often make space for kids to talk about the feelings of loss and the feelings of grief that are associated with some of these things that we wrap up as celebrations. Which then leads to anticipatory grief. And in my opinion and my experience, this is kind of where we are at right now when we think about the fall. It's the grief that a person feels prior to the loss, or kind of that impending loss. I don't know about you, but I have seen many plans. I have heard many kind of rumors about what the fall might look like. And I'm anticipating what the fall might look like, both myself as a mom and myself as a university level educator. And I have some anticipatory grief going on, because the plans that I've heard thus far, it's not going back to business as usual, which I understand why we're not, but I don't quite know what things are going to look like. I have a lot of questions. My kids have a lot of questions. Students have a lot of questions, and I don't have a lot of answers. And kind of that ambiguity is causing a lot of anxiety for myself, and I know for others as well. So talking to kids about, what the fall may look like, and we'll talk more about this in the weeks to come. So how then do we understand our own grief and work to understand our kids' grief to best help them moving forward? So we can look at grief through different theories and different approaches. And this is the one that most people are most familiar with. It's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5-stage cycle of grief. And she wrote about this in 1969 in her book on death and dying. And those 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Which it's lovely, and she did wonderful work, and I do not take that away from her. But she actually wrote this book for people who had the terminal illness, and she wrote these stages for their grief process as they accepted their impending death. She never wrote this with the intention for people who are left behind to use it for their grief process. And the trouble that I have with this is a lot of people, they'll talk about their grief in this very, very linear way. And they'll say, "I've gone through everything and now I'm at acceptance. Why am I back to anger? Why am I back to being depressed?" Because grief is not nice, neat, and linear. The approach that I tend to use more in my work, and I've used over the last 15 years, is J. William Worden's 4 Tasks of Mourning. And Worden is a psychologist out of the university at Harvard Medical School. And what he did is he broke it into these 4 tasks that people would go through as they work through their grief. The first one is to accept the reality of the loss. The second one, E, is to experience the pain of the loss. A is to adjust to the new life, and as he did without the person, because he did this as when people experience the loss of a loved one. And then R is to reinvest in the new reality. What the plan is over the next few weeks to release a video each week. And each week as we release a different video, I'm going to be concentrating on these 4 different stages of mourning that Worden talked about. So next week, if you tune in again, we'll be talking about the T, to accept the reality of the loss. What does that look like for you? What does that look like for your kiddos? The following week, we'll lean into the E, then the A, then the R. These videos are intended for those of you that have kids from about kindergarten to about the start of middle school. And the last week that will be a video is I'd like to give you all a chance to ask questions, send in your questions, and then the questions will be answered in the final week. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I hope that you tune in again in the near future. Thank you.